Good morning, everybody. I'm Greg Weiss. I am Palm Beach County Commissioner and Mayor of Palm Beach County. I want to thank you for being here for this important town hall on hate and anti-Semitism. I'm honored to be here and joined by an esteemed panel of guests and leaders and experts that are going to share their expertise with us this morning. I want to thank you all for being here as well on this important topic. As I was greeting people as you all were entering, I mean, we have a whole room full of VIPs because you are all VIPs, but there are some folks I really want to acknowledge that are here. First off, one of my colleagues from the County Commission, Commissioner Marcy Woodward is here. Marcy. We have former Ambassador Robin Bernstein. Robin. And then from FAU and the Republican Jewish Caucus, we have Barbara Feingold. Barbara, thank you for joining us this morning. From Lois Frankel's, Congresswoman Lois Frankel's office, we have Felicia Goldstein. Felicia. From Congressman Jared Moskowitz, we have Wendy Lipsick is with us. From the City of Palm Beach Gardens, Vice Mayor Rochelle Litt is with us this morning. And there are many, many others, and far too many for me to name. But honestly, in being here today, it is with a heavy heart that I'm here with you all to address this plague that's plagued humanity for far, far too long. And we're talking about anti-Semitism and hate and prejudice and discrimination that's been directed towards the Jewish people. You know, as a society, we've made progress in many areas. We've fought for civil rights and equality. We've pushed social justice, and we've worked to heal the wounds of the past. But anti-Semitism still persists. And it's not just a problem somewhere else or in distant history books. It's right here, and it's right now. This is not just an issue, though, for the Jewish community. It's an issue for all of us. When one group is targeted, it undermines the fabric of our society. It's beyond something that we can't deny, that in recent years, this has gotten worse. Vandalism of synagogues, violent attacks on individuals. It's clear that this hatred is still very much alive. But we can't let it defeat us. We must come together like we are today. We have to reject anti-Semitism in all its forms. We have to educate ourselves and others, including our children, on the dangers of this prejudice and stand up for what's right. We all have to be ambassadors for love and respect and work together to build a future where everyone can live without fear of hate and prejudice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a challenge, but I have faith in our ability to rise to it by coming together, by speaking out, by taking action. We can create a world where all people are treated with dignity and respect, no matter their race, religion, color, or background. So let's stand together. Let's say loud and clear that anti-Semitism has no place in Palm Beach County, in our country, or this world. Thank you. I want to thank Michael Williams for being our moderator this morning. I again want to thank you for being here, thank our panel, and Michael, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, Michael Williams with WPTV News Channel 5. We're streaming the entirety of this forum today, and so is Palm Beach County. It's that important, and for our Jewish and non-Jewish friends alike, a topic that all of us need to come together on. A few housekeeping notes. If you look at the screens, there may be a point throughout the discussion where you say, I'd like to send a question. You can go to the back of the room at that point, fill out a question card. I will then read it, and our panel can answer your question. Also, email, if you're so inclined, if that suits you to do it by email, but you have that option. One thing, and I've noticed it just once or twice, if I may, please ask, look in your purses, look in your pockets, please silence all cell phone devices right now. Everybody double check, even if you think you did it, and we'll get underway here. We do have, as I said, an esteemed panel here. It's my honor to introduce them. First of all, we'll begin left to right. Sheriff Rick Bradshaw, Palm Beach County. Kimberly Coombs, Program Planner of Holocaust Studies K through 12 here in Palm Beach County. Patrick Franklin, CEO and President of the Urban League of Palm Beach County. We move on to Rand Hawk, retired judge, President and founder of the Palm Beach County Human Rights Council. Lawrence Milstein, Regional Director, American Jewish Committee, Palm Beach County. Alan Poland, Community Security Director, the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. And Lonnie Wilk, Deputy Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Florida. We thank them all for being with us this day. We will begin, I think, appropriately talking about what is anti-Semitism. We know a lot of you felt it firsthand, or you've seen in the last many months in our community ugly, vulgar examples of it being displayed, but we do think fundamentally we should begin with, for our Jewish friends and our non-Jewish friends alike, what is anti-Semitism? Even that has become part of the national debate right now. And I think first, if we're going to talk about how we fight it, let's make sure we understand defining it. So we'll begin with you, Mr. Wilk, Anti-Defamation League, Florida. Lonnie Wilk, what is anti-Semitism? How do we define it?
Anti-Semitism is a historical hate towards the Jews, the Jewish community, the Jewish people, or the Jewish state of Israel. It's usually expressed through tropes, through hateful anti-Semitic canards, looking at an individual as or a small group representative of the whole, or the whole of the state of Israel, the whole of the Jewish community, and it focuses on efforts to denounce the Jewish people, to denounce their legitimacy as a people, to denounce their legitimacy as a religion, as an ethnicity, and it's increasingly becoming an issue in the U.S. from the left, from the right, and everywhere in between. It's coming from with religious connotations. It's using Holocaust and Nazi imagery and rhetoric. We've seen over the years, I think, a trend of, you'll see a little bit of a wave of religious anti-Semitism. And then that will decrease, and then you'll see a wave of anti-Israel-based anti-Semitism, and that'll decrease. And then you'll see Holocaust-related anti-Semitism. Now, in the last few years, we've seen, I think we've all felt the weight, because we've seen all expressions coming all the time in the U.S. and here in Florida.
We'll have plenty of opportunities to continue to explore that theme. As we move on with the same theme, Mr. Poland at Washington Times, a conservative outlet, but they pointed out, and this goes to the definition nature of our opening questions. They said last October, 9 student groups at the University of California at Berkeley Law School amended their bylaws to ensure that no one who supports Israel will be invited to speak on campus. They went on to say, and this is a quote, As a fig leaf for bigotry, the left tries to distinguish between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We don't hate you for being a Jew, they seem to say, according to this editorial. They seem to say, we just hate you for supporting the Jewish state. Talk about that, because again, when we go to the definition of anti-Semitism, then we collide with First Amendment rights, with protected speech on and off campuses. Your sense, picking up on what Mr. Wilkes said about the very definition of what anti-Semitism is.
So as far as what you quoted there, the definition of anti-Semitism, and as Mr. Wilkes said, it really is the prejudice and the discrimination against the Jewish people. The Jewish people are multifaceted. We're not just one thing. We're not just a religion. We're a culture. We all represent, in one way or another, the state of Israel. And so saying that it is differentiating, between anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, that's a very thin line. And it's one that it gets very, I'd say it gets very wavy at times. And you need to understand that because the Jewish people are so multifaceted in not just religion and culture and geography at times, that anything that discriminates against the Jewish people in any way would be considered, just like with any other type of individual or person or partners in society that we have, would be considered discrimination and anti-Semitism.
Mr. Milstein, Lawrence Milstein, pick up on that theme about the core of what drives anti-Semitic feeling, both historically and as we look at it now, and as we look, as Mr. Wilkes said, the increase in that. Pick up on that theme about how we've gotten to this place historically and where we are right now.
Yeah, well, it's important to realize that, we at AJC saw 20 years ago that there was an increase in anti-Semitism in Europe. And we put out a warning to governments there that something needed to be done because we're seeing this resurgence. Little did we know that that trend would make its way over to the United States, and it has, most recently. And it's very, very alarming to us. I want to add about the Israel component, because one of the things in defining anti-Semitism that's critical is there is an authoritative definition of anti-Semitism that was adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in 2016. And it outlines the various forms of anti-Semitism because it is complex. It is a little bit different than other forms of hatred and bigotry. Some similarities, but there are distinctions. And the distinctions have to do with conspiracy theories, right? There are conspiracy theories about Jewish power, Jewish control, which are part of anti-Semitism. Holocaust denial, part of anti-Semitism. Delegitimizing Israel, part of anti-Semitism. And that may be the newest trend that we've been seeing, this anti-Semitism, not necessarily from the right, though obviously we have that on the right, but we also have it from the left. And sometimes that's expressed as a hatred towards Israel. And we have to understand that hatred towards Israel, to its policies, to criticizing Israel's policies, is not necessarily anti-Semitism. All you have to do is read Israeli newspapers and see how critical the Israeli people are of their own government. But when you have expressions that demonize Israel, or they attempt to delegitimize Israel, or double standards are applied to Israel, then we have to ask ourselves, is there something deeper going on here rather than legitimate criticism of the state of Israel?
I think it's fair to ask, because you talk about tropes. You began with that, Mr. Wilk. Pick up on that. Let's hit the nail on the head. What are the tropes that you want to disabuse any of our audience about? Again, we have a very diverse audience. This room, of course, and we're so thankful and honored to have all of you here, but also we have a wide audience across this region looking in now. So let's talk about just a little bit more, Mr. Milstein. Anybody can pick up on this, and then we're going to move down the line. What are the chief, and I know we can talk about this all day, the tropes that you want to say? I want to disabuse you of those right now. What would they be? We'll start with you, Mr. Milstein.
Jewish power, Jewish control of the media, Jewish influence on politics, Jewish wealth, all Jews are wealthy, control of the media. Those are some more of the traditional ones, but most recently, in the last decade or so, we've had accusations of Jews being responsible for 9/11. The recent flyers that went around in Palm Beach County dealt with Jews being responsible for COVID and all the...
Mr. Wilk, what's the genesis of that kind of thing? Pick up on his thing briefly, and then we want to move down the line.
There's a historical nature to all of those tropes, and those have developed. They're not new. Their manifestations are definitely new. But we've seen Jews being seen as an other for centuries. We've seen individuals and groups look to marginalize Jews because it's a convenient scapegoat. We've seen ADL did a survey of anti-Semitic attitudes around the world. We saw massive levels of anti-Semitic attitudes, even in places where there are no Jews. But in some cases, and I think it is important to point out, it's a punching up type of discrimination, that Jews are not seen always as someone beneath or someone other, but Jews are seen as Lawrence just mentioned, this controlling conspiratorial group.
Rand Hawk, retired judge, president and founder of Palm Beach County Human Rights Council. Weigh in.
Well, I grew up in Massachusetts, went to school in Washington, D.C., moved to Florida in 1978, went to law school, moved to Palm Beach County, had a lot of family here. I represented labor unions and employees. And almost every time I dealt with a management employee from the town of Palm Beach, they referred to me as the New York lawyer. Now, I've been to New York a couple times, but I knew what they were saying, and that was a way for them to marginalize me and my law practice and my beliefs. And it wasn't just one or two cases. This was, the new New York lawyer. Mm-hmm. So it's out there, it's there every day, and they just want to put us in our place. Our place is along with everybody else's place in this country.
And we will talk later, we talked before the panel about marginalization of one group inevitably leads to marginalization of every group. And that's a key theme you're going to hear about during the next hour or so. But we want to move on. And Patrick Franklin, President and CEO, Urban League of Palm Beach County. Weigh in.
Well, this is not new. We have been involved with this struggle for a long time because when hatred spills over into every category, it affects not only our Jewish brothers and sisters, but also affects the African American culture and community, and we feel it all the time. It's there. It's outright, it's bold now. We can't say it just happened all of a sudden the last couple of years. No, it's been there. Only thing that we've seen right now is that it's been given the opportunity to come forward and be seen without any retribution from anyone else because it's okay. Now, if that's the way we want to live, then we need to stand up and be very strong together on how we oppose this, because when it affects one group, it affects all. And not only do we see hatred and all those other struggles, but racism that my group, the group that I represent, that we see each and every day of our lives, because in some cases, some people may say, well, I can avoid that struggle because of my color of my skin. When you look at African Americans, you can't. You can't avoid that racism because it's point blank, it's right in your face. But the struggle is real, and the hatred that's being spewed right now with the divisions that are across this country and getting wider and wider and wider each and every day. I think good people need to stand up and say, I had enough of this. When good people have said this, then we will have a change. But what I'm seeing right now is that good people are standing quiet with their hands underneath their legs, sitting on their hands, and they're being very complacent by not saying a word. And when we see that happening, you know, I've called a lot of people, I go like, open your mouth, and they just look at you. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, if you don't, then I'm saying you agree with it.
And we will pick up more on those themes. I want to move along to Ms. Coombs, and we're going to talk a little more deeply into the program about education and about understanding the world we're in, where we came from, where we're going. Education is such a key part of that. But you've heard what your other esteemed panelists have had to say so far. Your thoughts right now, program planner of Holocaust Studies, and we'll talk more specifically about your work, but your early thoughts.
Okay, so I thank you for having me here today, by the way. I wanted to jump on to what he said. So yes, I am the Holocaust Studies Program Planner, but I'm part of a bigger department of African American history, Holocaust, gender studies, Hispanic, Latino studies. And we all have to work together to put an end to this type of hatred in our school towards any group. So my focus, of course, is on Holocaust, and I think everyone in this room will agree that education is our best way to put an end to the hate.
And thank you for that prelude, because we're going to talk much more deeply about that a little bit later. Again, we felt it important to first talk, let's define, then we're going to talk about the intensity of what we're seeing. That's a good jumping off point. Sheriff Rick Bradshaw, you've heard what your panelists have said. Your sentiments, your thoughts, but then, of course, inevitably, all of us come and call on a PBSO when these frictions spill over into what we've seen in this community. So begin to pick up the conversation along those lines, because we've heard, well, your hands are tied, First Amendment rights to display hate or to throw things in people's yards that talk about hate and anti-Semitism. You hear these conversations. First thoughts.
Well, first of all, great to be here. Everything you've just heard is all valid information, valid reasons, and is reality. And that's why we have a two-prong approach, prevention and enforcement. On the prevention side, and you know this because we've had these discussions, we're very fortunate here in Palm Beach County that we are in charge of regional domestic security, which goes from Martin County to Key West. And we run the Regional Fusion Center, which is an intelligence gathering network. So we have the ability to know what's going on not only in the United States, but across the world. So if something happens, we find out if there's any connection to Palm Beach County. But the second part of that is we've enhanced our ability to network with all the groups that you've heard of here today. You mentioned them at the beginning, and open lines of communication where they can talk to us and we can talk to them, and network with the local rabbis, the synagogues, to understand what their needs and their issues are.
That's a good segue point. I want to jump in with you. There was an Anti-Defamation League report, which I'm sure Mr. Wilk is intimately familiar with, perhaps to help author a bit of it, or a lot of it. According to the Anti-Defamation League, in 2021, the highest year on record, this was nationwide, on record for documented reports of harassment, vandalism, and violence directed against Jews. The watchdog group, this report goes on from NPR, has tracked these incidents since 1979. Think about that. And it says, and it went on to say, and of course now we're into 2023, that it only saw the trend lines going higher. How bad is it? How many reports are you getting as you gauge that as the sheriff of this county, where we've seen these reports? How bad is it right now?
Well, I'm not going to say bad, but I'm going to say it's enhanced from what it was. But in our estimation, one is too many. All right? So we're very cognizant of what's going on. But I think the biggest jump forward that we've done over the last 10 years is the ability to network with all the groups and have this communication. It's almost like to see something, say something. If a local rabbi or somebody that's at the synagogue sees something they're uncomfortable with, now they have an avenue to get that to us, so we can do something on the prevention side. So that's an important aspect.
Sometimes, Sheriff, people say, that's not big enough. Yes, I hate what was thrown into my yard. I hate what I saw on the sign of a building, but that's it's not something I'm going to call PBSO about. I've known you long enough that I suspect your answer is going to be that's exactly what you should call about nothing's too small.
Exactly.
But empower people to know that they can do that.
Yeah,
Am I correct?
Exactly. Nothing's too small. That could be that one little piece of information that's a larger piece of the puzzle that we're looking at.
So if a flyer shows up in my yard with hate and anti-Semitism, which really are one and the same, you want people to call.
Yeah, we want to know. Now, let me just flip over to the enforcement side a little bit. And you're right. We have a balance here. We have a balance between what people's rights are
First
as the
Amendment,
First
right?
Amendment, but we also have to make sure that when it crosses that line, we're going to do what we have to do, right? We understand, we've been involved with the literature being thrown in the yard, but right now, the only avenue that we have to go forward with is it's littering. No matter what the nastiness is that's been spewed in here, it's littering. That's why we're hoping the legislature is going to enhance the penalties of somebody that's going to distribute this type of information. But having said that, I can tell you right now, this group that's doing this is ramping up their hatred every time they get involved out here in the public. So we have made a determination, because we watch them on a regular basis, we know who they are, we know where they're at, and I can tell you right now, if they come to Palm Beach County and they stand on the roadside and do what they need to do and inhibit the rights of the people that live here, they're going to jail, period.
Mr. Roque, we'll come back to you. You heard the report I quoted. You heard the sheriff talk forcefully and eloquently about many things, including how you have to do that balance between First Amendment rights, but also the rights of all of you in our community to not live in fear, to not be worried. Pick up on the theme of how bad is it right now? We've gone from defining it in some ways to what are you seeing? Then, obviously, inevitably, we're going to turn to more about how we combat it. I'd also mention that the mayor, in concert with really what he saw at the state level, there's ordinances in the work in Palm Beach County that would criminalize this kind of behavior of throwing hate-filled literature into yards, of putting it up on the side of a building, as happened in West Palm Beach one day. So there are efforts going on at the Palm Beach County level. We covered that recently. Pick up on the themes that you heard the sheriff talk about, both your concerns about where we are right now, how bad it is, and your feeling about how we begin to combat it.
And I would definitely also like to thank Sheriff Bradshaw and Mayor Weiss for their efforts, because we definitely, given the complexity and severity of where we are right now, we need a whole-of-society approach. So their efforts are very, very much appreciated.
And just to interject, because we have a countywide audience, and with WPTV, we have a 5-county audience. You all have all forcefully said this is not just a Palm Beach County issue. It's not just a Treasure Coast issue. It's not just a Florida issue. It's all of us issue. So I just want to point that out for the wider audience watching. Go ahead, sir.
So in 2020, ADL Florida tracked a 40% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in our state, both criminal and non-criminal. The next year, we rose another 50%. So we are at not only a record high of anti-Semitic incidents in the country, but we are at a record high of reported incidents that ADL tracks in the state of Florida. Our audit for 2022 is going to be released in about 3 weeks, but I cannot tell you the data yet, but it's not going to be good. But what I would also say is that in addition to the extremist incidents, in addition to criminal incidents of vandalism, of criminal level harassment, of assaults, we are also seeing issues pertaining to children, to students, and those incidents might not be criminal.
Give us a specific.
So as an example, in one of our reports, we found that greater than 65% of online gamers under the age of 18 are witnessing or having anti-Semitism directed at them on online gaming systems, and very few of them are reporting. If you ask any of your children or grandchildren where are they experiencing anti-Semitism, it might be in the classroom, but odds are it's taking place with some kind of social media app, gaming system. There is a significant increase in those expressions. So we also need, in addition to empowering our law enforcement, our legislature, and looking at those approaches, we also need to look at approaches to empower our children to stand up against anti-Semitism and all forms of bigotry, racism, homophobia.
Forgive me, is it a parroting for people that relatively young? Are they parroting what they hear, or is it more deeply ingrained than that? It's awful either way, but what is your sense of that? Because when I think of teenagers, I think, where are they learning that? Are they just repeating what they hear? Of course, if you repeat it enough, you may become someone who does believe it, but I'm curious about that.
We've seen incidents in the past of children in very young elementary school ages, and they're not learning those messages from shows on PBS. They're learning it from mom and dad.
They're being taught hate.
They're being taught hate, or they're learning that expressions of hate are not that severe. And the other aspect that we need to look at, I think, is that parents and grandparents, educators can look at ways to make sure that their students know and their children know how to report, how to flag an incident. When we go to social media companies and we say to them, look, here is the extent of the issue, they may not necessarily be getting the flags from their users, from their gamers. That needs to change.
Alan Poland is Community Security Director for the Jewish Federation here in South Beach County. We talk about statistics. Talk about your experience on that very human one-on-one level of what people are saying about the fear they have on a one-on-one level, what's happening to them personally. Sadly, I'm sure you have too much experience with that. Humanize this down to the person who's come to you and said, I'm scared. Talk about that.
Well, let's start a little larger than that,
Sure.
and then I'll go right down to that. As partners with Secure Community Network, which the Federation is, and that brought me into this position, SCN has a Jewish Security Operations Command Center that's manned 24/7 with intel analysts that are collecting data and collecting information from people that want to call in and report anything that occurs, whether it's suspicious behavior, whether it's a flying incident, and a lot of that information is shared with ADL. We have a great partnership with the ADL to make sure that we're all looking at the same data and the same incidents coming in, so there's no overlap. And there are thousands that have already come in this year, this calendar year. And that's everything from things happening online to things right in your face, like a swastika spray painted or drawn on the side of a wall. And it scares people. It scares people because they don't believe it can happen here, it can happen to them. And one of the things I try to tell people is that you must be prepared. You need to understand and get out of this mindset that it can't happen here. You have to get out of that denial mindset, because unfortunately it is happening.
Do we need to see, are we seeing significantly more synagogue security, for instance? We've done some stories on that. Talk about all of those.
We are definitely seeing more synagogue security. We're seeing people ramp up. There are organizations that come to me and say, what more can I do? I don't feel enough. But we are interacting, as the sheriff said, a lot with the police department.
And let me ask, just for show of hands, be very candid, how many of you, first of all, have experienced directly or indirectly some of what we're talking about? How many of you have said, I'm a little worried about whether I should go to synagogue. I'm concerned that I'm becoming a victim directly or indirectly of anti-Semitism. And hey, give a show of hands. Now look at all of those hands out there, and that's just in one room, all of these people who've said in one form or fashion, you're seeing it in person, you're seeing it as you come to and fro from the synagogue, you're seeing it in your daily life. You may see it as subtly or not so subtly, as Mr. Huck pointed out in the workplace, and we'll come back to that. So those are the real human examples of what we're seeing. And what do you say to these people who are raising their hands and say, this is overwhelming to me? Kind of goes back to the piece that Sheriff Bradshaw talked about. We'll come back around to that. But what do you say?
Well, I say that the best thing you could do is really go out, talk to me, talk to ADL, talk to organizations within our community that are dealing with this and how we can best prepare you to deal with it and what you can do about it. And we do have a great collaboration with the Sheriff's Department. There's a House of Worship liaison unit that we meet with quarterly. There's great communication, and it's not just synagogues. It's not just Jewish houses of worship. It's all houses of worship in the area. We meet, we collaborate, we talk about what's going on. The sheriff's captains and their district commanders are amazing partners. And this is all something that the sheriff put in place to help our faith-based communities.
And I would hope at the end, and I'm sure you will, that people are going to inevitably want to come up and perhaps get more of that information about outreach. We often find people say, I would have reached out, I didn't quite know what number to call, who to reach out to, so if that's beneficial, I know our panelists will be around after we're done, so you can get contact numbers, so you do feel you have a place to go and a place to place your concern. And it's obviously PBSO, we all know that pretty well, but sometimes these organizations that help PBSO, it's important for them to do that as well. Mr. Milstein, weigh in on all you're hearing.
Sure. So I did bring a couple of slides, and if Niels could bring them up, I think it'll be terrific here. So when we're thinking about the rise in anti-Semitism, we're thinking about its effect. And the numbers are important of the number of anti-Semitic incidents. But what AJC has been doing for the last 4 years is our State of Anti-Semitism report. And it's actually 2 surveys that are done simultaneously. The first one is measuring what is the Jewish community feeling, what are they experiencing regarding the rise in anti-Semitism. And the second survey asks the general population, what are their perceptions of what's going on. So if we could just go back to the one that says 41%. I'm just going to share with you 3 statistics from our recent survey that was just released 2 weeks ago. So 41% of American Jews said that they feel less secure in the United States today than they did 1 year before. That's a 10% rise from the same question that we asked in 2021. It was 31% there. So when you ask the people to raise their hands, we can now say we have data that will show that at least 4 out of 10 American Jews say they're less secure. That's pretty alarming to think about that in the United States in 2023. If we could go to the next slide, we also found that 4 in 10 American Jews said that they've changed their behavior in the last year out of fear of anti-Semitism. And they said they changed their behavior in one of 3 ways. 23% said that they decided not to wear something that would identify them as a Jew, whether it's a yarmulke, a skull cap, a Jewish Star of David. Another 16% said they changed their behavior by not going to a particular venue, to a synagogue, or to a Jewish event out of fear of anti-Semitism. And then the other group said that they did not reveal how they felt on social media out of concern that it would reveal their Jewish identity and they would face backlash from anti-Semitism. So the Jewish community is being affected. Clearly, their behavior is being changed. And these data points, among many from our survey, we'll be using when we have our conversations with policymakers in government going forward to how we use that data to combat it with effective policies.
And again, a show of hands, how many of those definitions fit changes you've made in your life in the last year or two, based on the statistics you just saw on that screen? And that's sad that we have to see even one hand go up. I'm going to come to this end of the table quickly because we're talking a bit about the statistics. And you see this, Sheriff, it gives voice and statistics to what you talked about. And I can imagine people saying, feeling pretty helpless. Help them feel less so.
Yeah, and that part of our Homeland Security Initiative, we actually had about 400 people from all of the religious institutions, and we put on a seminar for them to say, look, here's what you need to look for, here's how you protect yourselves, here's the information we want to get from you, and it was very well received. I think we're going to put on another one, given the recent events, just to reiterate it. But again, if nothing else today comes out of here, nothing else comes out of here, I want people to leave here and say, you know what? They're paying attention. They understand our problems. They understand our fears. And it's not something that we just put to the side and say, we'll get to it. This is on the front burner with us. This is an important issue, and we are paying attention to what's going on. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of comfort. Can I tell you we can stop it all? No. Right? You don't want to hear something that's not the truth. The truth is we're paying attention to it. We're going to do the best we can to prevent it. And when it happens, the best we can do to bring those people to justice.
Rand Hawk, we talked about this even before you all sat on the panel, but it reminds us again and again. Hate doesn't find barriers. It finds a way to expand beyond one group. We did a story recently. A gentleman said, I'm not Jewish. It's not directly impacting me right now. He says, but I know I may well be next. You certainly with the LGBTQ community have a sensitivity to that. Speak to that, because this is an issue for all of us. All of you've talked about it, but it's a point that we need to bring home again and again.
Thank you. Transphobia and homophobia are very serious problems here in Florida. And we've heard some statistics. I'm going to give you one. Since 2015, 27 trans people, mostly of color, have been murdered here in Florida. And we had a case in 2019, and they caught someone, and that's the last we've heard of it. There's no idea where this person is, if we were left out of the judicial system, but they're just dragging out there. These are young, dead, trans people of color, and more has to be done. We have a great respect for the sheriff's department, the police departments here. They're good. But the problem is, once it gets into the order part of law and order, people seem to get lost in the shuffle, or the penalties that they're handed out are a joke.
And Mr. Wilk, I saw you shaking your head sadly. The rise in it doesn't surprise you, because as hate rises it does not find one group, it finds all of us.
Yeah,
And
most
you
of...
see that in your studies and what you know anecdotally and directly.
Absolutely. Most people who express hate or bigotry towards one group don't stop at one group.
Why do we hate each other? And I know some people are going to say, and rightly so, but that's not most of us. The statistics are bad, but most of us go home and feel fairly comfortable, or maybe we tell ourselves that so that we try to wrap ourselves in some perceived sense of security. But so maybe the question's a little too blunt, but I'll ask, at least based on what you hear in this room, and I want to get Mr. Franklin involved here too, and then we're going to talk about how we begin to combat it. But why do we hate each other so much now, or seem to in many realms?
I think we can look towards our education and Holocaust education especially, and I want to make sure to acknowledge Robert Tannen, the director of the Southeast region of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And when we look at aspects of what transpired during the Holocaust or any form of genocide, we know that things did not start at the end. We know that things started with ideas, with rhetoric being permissible, whether it's racist, homophobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic remarks, jokes. We don't stand up against those because maybe it's a little funny, maybe we think that there's some validity to it. And once we give license to expressions of belittling people for their intrinsic characteristics, not for something they did, but who they are. There is nothing you can stop doing from being who you are. Once we see that rhetoric accelerate to actions, once we see that those actions being acknowledged and not responded to, it can easily accelerate towards systemic discrimination and further.
You can't legislate acceptance and kindness toward one's neighbor or somebody who's other. Nonetheless, we hear about law enforcement efforts. I talked briefly about lawmaking efforts in Palm Beach County, but candidly, and I'll begin with you, Patrick Franklin, you have a pulse on the community and voters and what's going on legislatively, so we'll start there. Candidly, are lawmakers at every level doing enough to recognize? You just heard the audience's response. I'd like to get a sense of that, if they're doing enough, if they're not doing enough, and where specifically you think they need to go, whether that's at the local, regional, state, federal level. And Patrick, weigh in first.
Where can we get started?
We can do 2 hours on this alone,
Yeah.
but give me your thoughts.
Look at what's happening right now and what's going on in the state legislature over the last 2 years or so. We look at everything from voter oppression, and if you agree with what's going on, then you think that people of color don't have the right to vote, that we don't have the need to vote, we aren't in that privileged sector to vote. You look at the disallowance now of Black history and why it's gone on with so many different iterations from CRT. I didn't even know what CRT was until it came up earlier last year.
It's not taught in schools.
Right. Tie that also into the broader theme of this particular discussion.
Well, when you look at hatred and things like that happening, it's in a Black church that gets so many people killed in Charleston. It's in a synagogue wherever in Pittsburgh. It's in all these different places, but I look back honestly at our influx of guns and availability of guns that are just outrageous right now. And it's not of where is when. When's the next issue going to happen? All you got to do is turn the TV on and just wait for the next breaking news to happen, to figure out where did that happen. And I always, in my mind, saw where in Florida is that, okay? That's happening. But I think so far we have to look and understand that if you think the criminal justice systems, if you think different gun laws and voter suppression, all that is happening and it's affecting people of color, just like the other speaker says, it's coming your way. Something else is be next.
So,
If I could jump in for a second, it's not just the legislature that is sitting on its hands and doing nothing to help us face the problems with hate crimes. The Florida Supreme Court used to require every new judge to go through a day-long diversity training. So it dealt with people of color. It dealt with different religions. It dealt with the gay and trans community. And yesterday, I'm picking up the Florida Bar News to learn that the Florida Supreme Court has removed that requirement. And they disbanded their standing committee on diversity.
And Patrick, you shook your head.
Look at what's happening in the state of Florida for our university system. DE&I, cut out. Okay, because an edict came down back in, I think it was November, to all state universities. List down all your areas where you do D&I, who's doing it, how much you spend on it, and before you know it, the next law comes by, cut it all out.
Mr. Milstein, do you see a direct causation or connection between these kinds of observations and the anti-Semitism that is the focus here today?
Definitely a correlation.
Talk about that.
I want to,
And then I want to get to the lawmaking part from you gentlemen as well, and then we're going to jump in with Kimberly about how we try to move beyond this. But go ahead, Mr. Milstein.
so one of the questions that I get asked, and I'm sure many of my colleagues on the panel get asked the same question as too, and you asked it, it's like, why now? Like, why do we have this resurgence now? Let me just speak to that from the perspective from anti-Semitism specifically for a minute. I think one of the key reasons is as we get further and further removed from living knowledge of the Holocaust, there's a certain acceptance among people, a willingness among people to be able to make anti-Semitic remarks and comments. 20, 30 years ago, there was a certain shame associated. Even if somebody felt it, they wouldn't voice that expression because they had knowledge of what the Holocaust was about. They knew people. It was within living memory. As we get further and further away from that, there's a sort of certain comfort level that people don't have that knowledge, and that will come back to why Holocaust knowledge is so important. So there's a certain level of shame that's no longer there as the history of the Holocaust becomes further and further removed. We're also going through a period of economic uncertainty through the pandemic. We know throughout history when there's economic uncertainty, hatred rises, anti-Semitism rises. And maybe one of the more critical ones that we've seen most recently is we're living in a society where there's a tremendous distrust for government among many people. Conspiracy theories, not just against Jews, but among government, are rampant. And at its core, anti-Semitism is itself another conspiracy theory. So it fits into this trend that we're seeing. And the last point I just want to make, and it's been brought up before, is we can't ignore social media. The prevalence of social media today to be able to put out at lightning speed hate and send it across the world in seconds. We're working on that. We can talk more about how we can combat that. But just one of the other statistics from our survey that we did was 70% of the Jewish community said that they experienced anti-Semitism online in the past year. And if we take that down to the 18 to 29-year-olds, the younger community, that number jumps to 85%. So 85% of 18 to 29-year-olds have experienced anti-Semitism online. It's a major problem that has to be dealt with.
All right, since we're on that theme, and I want to get Kimberly in here, but just briefly, I see you shaking your head, Mr. Wilk. Let's talk a little about the social media component. I still want to talk about, not that we can legislate our way out of everything, but what more needs to be done specific to today's topic. But talk about the social media component. Patrick and I, on To the Point, talk about this all the time. Mr. We'll talk about the social media aspect, and that ties into what the sheriff's talked about on the law enforcement aspect. But a lot of people say, what can we do? People are allowed to say and be, and too often do or spout the worst of vulgarities on social media. But weigh in.
So I think there's two aspects of dealing with hate, especially in the online community.
And you do agree that it's become the wellspring for a lot of what we're seeing?
It's become a significant source. If you look at if you remember the attack on two mosques in New Zealand, that was live streamed on social media, and we had extremist individuals in the U.S. then mimic and carry out attacks here based on that influence.
So proactively, what, if anything, can we do about it? It's like trying to put your finger in the dike, and there's so many holes you don't know where to start.
So one, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, make sure that you have a sense of where your children, where your students, your grandchildren, what their online footprint is, and I know that can be difficult, but having those proactive discussions, starting at a young age, can do a lot of good. Second, we have to make sure that we advocate to those social media companies and gaming platforms that when there are issues of anti-Semitism, of racism, of homophobia, of any kind of bigotry, they can take action. They are private companies. Now, there are limitations. Look, free speech incorporates hate speech. However, when you look at those promulgating hate speech, when we look at the group that we've seen very active here in Florida of late, it's not a huge group, but they use their voices very loudly. Every single person in this room, watching online, watching on TV, every single one of us has our voices as well. You can use your voice, use it wisely. Don't necessarily denounce everything as extremism, everything as bigotry, because we do want to acknowledge and allow people who are not yet at the level of extremism to acknowledge what they've done, say, wait a second, I didn't know that I was expressing that, or I was invoking a trope, I didn't even know it. Allow them to acknowledge and move back. But when we look at what we can do, empowering our children to flag things online, to flag issues on social media, is a vital step.
And I do think it's important to point out there's so much ongoing debate about the Israeli-Palestinian situation and about the U.S. and its longstanding involvement there. I know that you want to be careful about saying that that's part of the rigorous free speech, but I think it's worth, with this big audience both here and elsewhere, to say that's part of the discussions about foreign policy that are valid. Some of that's spilling over in places, turning into anti-Semitism, but in and of itself, those are debates that are healthy and good to have. But I think that nuance is something worth pointing out.
Yeah, as Lawrence mentioned earlier, all you have to look to see, I mean, even just in the last few days, you'll see thousands of Israelis in the streets demonstrating, bringing to light issues related to their views on their government. You can express regarding any government in the world, including our own, what you believe, what you don't believe. Stand up for your beliefs, stand up for your values, absolutely. But when you demonize, when you delegitimize a country and you invoke traditional anti-Semitic canards to do so, that is above and beyond. You can be pro-Palestinian without being anti-Israel, and you can do so without being anti-Semitic.
Hey, Michael.
Yes,
Michael, just real
you read
quick.
my mind. Go ahead.
Real quick. I mean, some common sense has got to come into play here. Look what we found out about what Twitter was doing behind the scenes. To me, it's pretty sad when you can go on the social media or internet and learn how to make a bomb. Or the terrorist groups converse with each other over those platforms. We got to come to some common sense here and say, that's not First Amendment stuff. That's stuff that hurts people. We've got to put some guidelines, some limits on it, and I don't think that Congress is going in the right direction. They're saying, well, they're having hearings. Big deal.
What tools would be most respecting First Amendment rights, which are of critical importance, of course, but what tools, even given that, especially given that, would you like to see that would be most helpful for law enforcement, since social media does seem to be such a wellspring, a genesis for much, not all, but much of what we're talking about?
First Amendment's good, but you don't get to yell fire at a crowded theater, okay? It's that simple. We've gone too far by saying everything is covered by the First Amendment. It's not, okay? The second thing we have to do is realize that there's some information. It's like a psychologist has a meeting with a person, and during that meeting, this guy says, there's no doubt, I'm going out, get a gun, and I'm going to this school, and I'm going to shoot a bunch of people. Wouldn't you think that that person that is counseling this man has a duty to get a hold of law enforcement or somebody ahead of time and say, this is going to happen? But they don't do that.
Right.
How many times have we seen bad incidents happen where somebody after the fact says, geez, I knew that was going to happen because I saw it on social media, somebody was a classmate telling me about it, but they don't tell people about it, right? There's got to be some serious guidelines put on this social media thing, not to shut them down, but go back to what the original purpose was when they first started. And the original purpose when they first started isn't even close to where they're at now.
Hillary Combs, I want you to begin to weigh in, because a lot of this comes back to what we're learning, how we're teaching, how we're thinking, kind of synthesize a lot of what you've heard and bring us more directly to what you're doing as we turn to more of the proactive efforts to try and combat this. Talk about that as part of the education effort.
Okay, thank you. I have so much to say.
Go ahead.
I want to start with going back to the fears. And we talked about we raised our hand that we're Jewish. Let's talk about our children. So we have this great exhibit happening right now in Palm Beach County Schools. It's been in our schools for, it's ending tomorrow. It's been there for 5 weeks. It's a replica of a cattle car. And the students go inside and they hear from 2 Holocaust survivors. It's a 360-degree engaging, and I can talk about that program later, but it's a 360-degree engaging film. And then they come out and they see artifacts. Well, after they come out, there's a debriefing session. And in that debriefing session, we talk to them about what they just saw, and then we bring it to, when are you seeing examples of hate in your life? When are you seeing examples of anti-Semitism or racism? So here we are in a school in Boca recently, and a very brave student raised his hand and said, I'm afraid to wear my kippah to school. So, our students are feeling that fear too. Not from what they're seeing in school, but like you said, from what they're seeing on social media, from what our celebrities are saying, from what our athletes are saying. So they're scared because their peers are copying these leaders in our communities. So I thought that was really, really powerful. Another student that was wearing, just to give you an optimistic closure to that, another student that was wearing a kippah came over to that student and they had a chat about it. And that student's going to be more involved with the Jewish Student Union at the school. But it was brave of that student to be able to speak up in a group. And so we're doing a lot of things like that.
Talk a little bit about that as program planner of Holocaust Studies. Talk about some of the proactive things you're doing to try and inoculate and teach this generation and future generations.
So in Florida, we all know we have a state mandate to teach Holocaust in grades K through 12 every year. We do that, we meet that mandate. Recently, they added to that mandate that we must define anti-Semitism in our schools, make sure that students and teachers understand what it is, recognize it, what to do when they see it. So we're really working hard to do that in all grades K through 12 at an age-appropriate level, of course. But in Palm Beach County Schools, we are dedicated to going 1,000% above that state mandate. And we bring programs in, like this cattle car that throughout this month is going to reach over 5,000 students. We have a commitment to have a Holocaust survivor, while we still have that privilege, to speak to 100% of our high schools and a majority of our middle schools. And that creates that empathy that we're looking for. That gives the students the opportunity to know, oh, this really happened. I'm learning this history from the lips of somebody who was there. We have a lot of community partners who provide resources for us. We put on live shows about Anne Frank. Recently, we hosted, in partnership with some of our panel up here, we recently hosted an anti-Semitism prevention day. And that was in response to what we're seeing in the media. We decided that as a district, we're not going to just sit by and say, we're okay with this. We need our students and our teachers and our staff members to know that we're going to take a stand and we're saying this is not acceptable in our schools. So we actually had on January 3rd, 150 school district employees. They were not just teachers, they were teachers, but they were school secretaries, they were school police that joined us at Park Vista High School just to understand and learn about the history of anti-Semitism that goes back for thousands of years, and to understand where we're at today. We showed some of these same slides. because it's important that we all come together and we say we're not going to accept this.
And we're going to get to a few of the questions that are coming my way from the audience in just a moment. I'd go back, Mr. Poland, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I'd just like a sense, there's no magic wand legislatively, but if you were standing before the state legislature, before the local governmental bodies, before Congress, what would you say, at least from that aspect, you'd like to see more of being done? Let's pick it up there. And I know that's a tough topic, but I'd like to have a couple of you weigh in on it.
That is a tough topic because we are weighing a balance between the Constitution and our constitutional rights that we all
Enjoy.
hold dear, and the idea that as a community we shouldn't be scared and we shouldn't be afraid of anything, and we should be accepted by everyone, just as every community that's represented up here. So I would say it's time to think outside of the box. It's time to come up with some ideas, and I'm not saying I have any. I wish I did. But maybe there are some things in treating the law a certain way in that we can define things differently in legislation and say that certain types of speech, as we're doing now, as is currently proposed, maybe that does raise things up, even from something as simple as littering, that we all think, oh, it's some sort of violation, not that big of a deal, but what you're littering may matter. And I think that's a great step forward right now.
Are you satisfied, Mr. Wilk, with the degree at which lawmakers who have their own bully pulpits at any level are speaking out? We had recently former president meeting with a Holocaust denier here in Mar-a-Lago, and we don't want to go into a political discussion per se, but at every level, do you feel that people who have that pulpit are speaking out loudly enough, and how would you like them to speak out? And I know it's a tough question and a fine line between our constitutional rights and dealing with this, but that's the question to you.
So I think from a legislative standpoint, we need to see more. We definitely do applaud a number of local representatives are supporting the HEAL Act, which is just being proposed, which will give funding to states to do accountability for Holocaust education through their school systems. That's a great step. We do need to look at our legislators, and indeed every single one of us, to denounce anti-Semitism or any form of bigotry, especially when it comes from a group that you identify with. We know when there is a expression of anti-Semitism or a legitimization of anti-Semitism coming from the extreme right, we know the extreme left is going to denounce it. That's a given, and vice versa. But we need to have the courage, and it can be difficult, but we need to have the courage to call out anti-Semitism or bigotry when it comes from my own group. I want to say to the group that I identify with, whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat, whatever group political, cultural, whatever you affiliate with, if you're a Marlins fan or God forbid, a Mets fan, right? Speak out.
That's another forum.
Yeah, speak out against expressions of bigotry and make sure that your own group understands that if they express bigotry, that you are going to stand up and speak out, and you're going to do so loud and consistently.
Can I add that something that's really important for us to do also is to teach our youth, our students, to be critical thinkers, right? So they're watching these things on social media, and they have to know that they can't believe everything they see. They can't believe everything that they hear. We ask them to, if you see something, and we teach this in all content areas, not just Holocaust education, but all content areas. If you see something and you're not sure, fact check it. Make sure that what you're reading, what you're seeing, ask questions, start conversations. That's the message we need to get out to our kids. They need to be critical thinkers in the future if we're going to end this.
I'm starting to get questions, and thank you for your eloquence and passion. In fact, all of you, I think although we've got a ways to go, a round of applause for some really thoughtful commentary across the board here. And for all of you joining us here, because if you're not here, they're speaking into an echo chamber. And for all of you joining us online at the county level and through WPTV, as every one of you said, and I know you've said it, Sheriff, many times over the years, law enforcement can't do its job. Educators can't do their jobs. Thought leaders in the community can't do their jobs without all of us coming off the sidelines. So we applaud all of you. We're starting to get questions. Mr. Poland, this is one, somebody said on the Shabbat, the Orthodox Jewish community, they can't carry a cell phone. Is that a safety issue? So there's real-world, everyday concerns, but, you know, you smile, but somebody, that's their question. They say, what about me?
So I would address that as, for those who are familiar with the Jewish law of pikuach nefesh, the preservation of life, carry the cell phone. You know, in Pittsburgh, Tree of Life, Rabbi Myers wasn't carrying a cell phone. He didn't carry a cell phone for the longest time. That was his religious belief, not to carry a cell phone. It was the community security director in Pittsburgh that was training him, Brad Orsini, who's now the national security advisor for SCN, who convinced Rabbi Myers to carry a cell phone because of this rule of pikuach nefesh, this concept of preservation of life. And he said to the rabbi, you know, it's not just a matter of an attacker coming in. What if someone's having a heart attack? What if it's a medical emergency? We're talking about preservation of life, which trumps every other rule within Judaism. And therefore, Rabbi Myers started carrying a cell phone. Rabbi Myers was the first 911 call when the shooting started at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh.
Another question comes in, and it goes to this tug of war on constitutional issues, and a reminder that the rights we have, if we become scared as a society, when do we start trampling on the rights that gave rein to people having the opportunity to say what they think, however hateful or ugly? One questioner here in the audience said, day of hate, illegal, question mark, went on to say, that there was this talked about planned day of hate last week. Wasn't this unconstitutional compared to yelling fire in a crowded theater? And should it have not, should not be considered free speech? So again, this tug of war, anybody weigh in on that? But these are the kind of discussions you have when people are rightfully scared, the kind of debates and concerns. What do you say to that person?
Well, you know what you say to them is, do they have the right to have a day like that? Yes. But do they have the right during that day to encourage people to go out and do violent acts? No. You know, it's like when we had protests here in Palm Beach County, I wouldn't let people block the roads in the street. And I caught a little bit of flack from that, from some of the news media. But here's my stance on that. I made sure that the demonstrators had all the room that they wanted, wave their signs, walk up and down the sidewalks, say whatever they needed to say. But you, as a citizen, have the right to traverse these roads, to go home, to go to the hospital, to go to the grocery store. They don't have the right to infringe upon your rights. And I think that's where the balance comes in.
Sheriff, as always, thank you. Another questioner says, and we've talked about this, but I don't think we can say it too much or talk too much about it. How can I help? The simple plaintive question, how can I help? I've been writing emails and letters to the powers that be about the anti-Semitism, including on universities. It falls on deaf ears. Again, how can I help? Please be specific. Let's move down the line. Kimberly, we'll start there, and then we'll move all the way down the line, because at the end of the day, people want to at least be empowered. Kimberly, let's start with you.
I say we start with educating our children on speaking up. You know, I've heard from different parents about things that happen on the soccer fields, where, you know, they hear one student say another thing, or it's always in a text message, because kids don't say things face-to-face to each other that they would put in a text message. So as parents, as community members, talk to your students about speaking up. When you hear somebody saying anti-Semitism, even if it's directed at you, talk to them about not being afraid to tell you or to tell a teacher, because we have to speak up so that we can then have conversation with their parents or their kid, that kid, and help to put an end to it.
Mr. Franklin?
Well, in your question, it said that I've been writing and contacting, and I haven't heard anything. Well, each one of you have a right to vote. Each one of you have a vote. Make sure that you vote for those individuals that have your best interests in mind. And as they're campaigning, you question them and put that question in front of your concerns. Utilize that. But the best thing you can do is to teach and educate and make someone else aware that's your neighbor, a family member, an acquaintance, a coworker, whatever you need to do. But talk about what are those things that affect you the most. But make sure that you actually cast your ballot and vote for those in your best interests.
Mr. Hark, before we get to you, I will say somebody walked up to me just before it started speaking that it's all of our battle, and said that Pastor Tim May with the United Methodist Church of the Palm Beaches just concluded a 4-part sermon series on anti-Semitism. So a reminder that he felt, his congregation felt, that it's everybody's concern, everybody's fight. Mr. Hawk, to the how can I help? What do I do?
I just want to follow up because voting is extremely important. And part of voting is showing up at a meeting where somebody's saying, hi, I want to be your state legislator, I want to be your U.S. president, and ask the questions in front of the crowd. Make sure that everyone hears the answers that you're being given, or more often, how they dodge the question. And tell people about your experience and tell them why you're supporting or opposing a particular candidate based on your personal experience in a crowd so they can't deny it, no matter how much they try.
Mr. Milstein?
Very good. So look, one of the things that's clear is to combat anti-Semitism, it's going to take the entire society. It's not an issue just for the Jewish community. It's not just an issue for Palm Beach County. It's the entire society. We launched in October something called a call to action against anti-Semitism, which gives specific guidelines to different sectors of community, because everybody can play a role, whether it's a corporation, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's social media, whether it's government. And we offer specific guidelines. So I would encourage people to go to our website and take a look at AJC's call to action at ajc.org. But specifically here, I think we should, on the panel, and Michael and the mayor, we should commend everybody who showed up here today, because one of the ways that we're going to combat this is by the community coming together. And the fact that all of you came here today, and for all of you who are watching, that's one of the key elements to solving this problem. It has to be the entire community coming together and making sure that those bigots and anti-Semites know that hatred, bigotry, anti-Semitism are not welcome here in Palm Beach County or anywhere else in this country. They need to be ostracized. We need to keep them on the fringes of society.
Let me, you can pick up on this theme, but to Mr. Poland and Mr. Wilk, the American Jewish Committee had put out its action items for state and local government. We'll begin with you, but for any piece of this, there's a law enforcement component to some of what they talk about, so I want to get your feelings about what more we can do to help, but responding, we've talked about it, but the AJC says issue unequivocal condemnations. You talked about that. Depoliticize the fight against anti-Semitism. Establish institutional mechanisms. Encourage reporting of hate crimes. What grades would you give our community right now on that checklist alone, Mr. Poland?
Well, reporting is definitely a big thing, and we started talking about that a lot earlier, where we saw that we're seeing a rise in things. Sometimes I'm afraid to say that. Yes, there's a rise, but is that really what's happening, or has it always been there and now there's just more reporting of it? So that question comes up as well. We see it more out there. We're seeing it, as we said, in social media. Why? Because hate is moving at the speed of social media. And at this point, when everyone can get it just on their phone and all the children are seeing it, it's important that we report everything that we see. And whether that's reporting to an organization such as the ADL or SCN, or if it's an actual crime, immediately reporting it to the Sheriff's Department, it's something that we need to do to track exactly what's happening, because reporting is probably the best way to show the community as a whole that we're not going to stand for what's going on, and those in power in our community, such as government, that this is an important issue for all of us.
And I'll reiterate, at the end of this, I think it's a great opportunity for people, if you don't have those numbers, to make sure you don't walk out of here without having those resources. PBSO, of course, most of us know how to do that, know how to get in touch, know about the see something, say something, but please don't go home when you have these wonderful resources without making sure you don't have every one of them. I'd also go to you, Mr. Wilk, on those same themes. What grade do you give where we are? And then there's some others that I want to talk about from the American Jewish Committee. We'll begin to wrap it up shortly after that, but first, your thoughts.
I would say we definitely, we definitely have significant room to improve locally, statewide, and nationally on a variety of different fronts, but I think we need to start with this and understanding that other than in a movie theater, silence is not golden. As Ellen mentioned, the impetus to report is vital. We cannot, none of us on this panel, none of the organizations that we represent can create policy resolutions. Our legislators cannot figure out what laws to put forward if we do not know the extent of the problem. So reporting incidents is vital to ADL, to SCAN and the Federation, to law enforcement. The other aspect that I think we often overlook is, including here in our state way too much, is the value of allyship. When there is a racist incident that you see in the news, that you see on WPTV, call up the institution that was targeted. Hi, I am Joe Schmo. I want to just say I saw what happened to your institution. I saw the vandalism, the threat that was, whatever the case may be. I want you to know you don't stand alone. I've been working with ADL since 2009, and I cannot tell you how many institutions, Jewish institutions, Muslim institutions, black institutions, LGBTQ institutions, when we speak to them after an incident, they say, you're the first call we've gotten.
Thank you.
And too often, the only call we've gotten. Offer your allyship. It costs you nothing. It costs you nothing to stand up for someone else, and then once you develop that relationship, they will stand up for you as well.
Sheriff, going through the AJC checklist, and this is one that's going to give all of you an opportunity to respond. This particular one, not precisely your bailiwick, but examine bail laws, they say. They say states should examine existing bail laws. They talk about, for example, New York mandates that a person charged there with less than a Class D felony may not be detained and may not be subject to a bail requirement. They argue because nearly all anti-Semitic attacks are less than Class D felonies, victimizers may walk out of court with what appears to be impunity. Again, it's not your job or place to change those laws, but just like your broad sense, this is the kind of things and discussions do you think we need to be having?
Yeah, fortunately for us, that hasn't trickled down here. I mean, the judges have been good here. First appearance, they seem to understand the gravity of letting somebody out that's repeat offenders. And we have a good state attorney. He's pretty aggressive on prosecuting people. But I would say to the audience out here, you guys need to change your name. Don't be the silent majority, be the vocal majority.
Be louder.
All right? Everything that you've just heard about speaking up, about networking with somebody else, you can't be silent. You can't say, I'm going to let my neighbor next door do it because I don't have time. You got to get involved. You got to get engaged. Right? The legislature up there in Tallahassee now has got to look at the laws that apply to this anti-Semitic behavior. I can only work with the tools that are given me. If I don't have the tools, I can't do anything about it. So whatever enhancement they're looking at, call your representative. Call the people that are representing you here and say, listen, we need this because this is a problem. But quit being the silent majority.
The AJC goes on to say preventing anti-Semitism. We've touched a lot on this, but it's a good way to wrap up. They say invest in Jewish community security, implement a comprehensive strategy, convene stakeholders. Mr. Poland, have we done enough here locally to invest in Jewish community security? Obviously, PBSO and other law enforcement agencies, municipal agencies doing their part. Are you comfortable that enough's been done or is being done or will be done?
I think when we're talking about Jewish communal security, it's a never-ending it's a never-ending topic. There's more done now than there has been in the past, and there continues to be more done. And it has to be continual and perpetual. We have to constantly work on it because we need to get better than the quote-unquote bad guys, right? We have to make sure we're prepared. And that is probably the most important thing because we can't choose the time and place of a next attack or incident, but we can choose our level of preparation for it. And that is probably where I try to really tell the community that I work with that that is their most important job, is to be prepared, to really understand what is happening out there, and to know that they have things that they can do. The work they do alongside the collaboration with PBSO and other police departments, target hardening locations that are soft if necessary, right? But that all comes within a strategy. It has to be a multi-layered strategy. It can't be something that you're just doing on your own. It has to be a collaborative effort with everyone in the community and the community surrounding us, not just the Jewish community.
Have we done enough to implement, as AJC, forgive me, says, implement a comprehensive strategy, to your point, where elected officials perhaps more clearly focus on a specific effort, a watchdog or the bulldog who's your point of contact for this strategy that's more clearly defined? Do you see that at local levels?
I'd say that there's a lot that's been done, and there's still a lot that needs to happen, because this is a never-ending issue.
I see the mayor shaking his head, and certainly he and his team, lawmakers, elected and unelected, dealing with that. We'll close, encourage media literacy. We've talked about that, awareness of social media, strengthening education on Jews, anti-Semitism, and the Holocaust. Ms. Coombs, that's something you've talked eloquently about.
Yeah, I want to go on with what Sheriff Bradshaw was just saying. You know, in the 1930s, a lot of people in Europe stood by silently. And so we need to learn from that time period and know that we can't stand by silently. We need to be louder than hate. And like everybody said, we need to come together and we need to educate our children and our students on the lessons of Holocaust. We need them to understand what happens when hate goes unchecked. And so we will continue to educate our students over and over again.
We're coming up to just a little less than 10 minutes. On my weekend broadcast, which I know all of you watch, To the Point.
I do.
I didn't hear enough laughter there. Anyway, I hope a lot of you watch. In fact, I'm about to waylay a few of these people to be my guests this week because this has been such an important topic. What I would like to do, I always kid my guests at the end of To the Point. A lot of them will say, oh, it was great, I really enjoyed it, but wow, there was one more thing I really wished I'd bring up. I said, we've been talking for 15 minutes, and everything you say airs. We air every word that our guests say. I said, say it. So with that in mind, if there's something I've not touched on, and I'm sure there's tons, if there's that thought that you haven't illuminated upon yet, now's your chance. I want to give each of you a final chance for your final thoughts, something that perhaps you feel needs more emphasis, or your takeaway for our audience on this most pivotal and important topic, both for all of you here, a packed house, and also for all viewing on streaming channels and WPTV throughout the county. We'll begin with you, Sheriff Bradshaw, and we'll move down the line. Your turn.
Yeah, I think that the most important aspect that I would like to stress again is the prevention part. Communication, feeling comfortable about getting a hold of us. I mean, we have an app that you can get a hold of us on, and you don't even have to identify who you are. Just give us the information. The more information we have, the more we can put the puzzle together to do what we need to do. So we do a good job at our intelligence gathering. We do a good job on the enforcement side when we have the opportunity. But on the prevention side, we can't operate unless we have input from the people that are out here. So if you know something, you have to say something. You can't sit on the sidelines and say, oh, well, that's not important. That little piece of information could be just what we needed. So feel free to call us. And again, if you don't leave here with anything else, understand we're paying attention. We understand your fears, and we're here to help you.
Kimberly Coombs, Program Planner. Go ahead, please. Kimberly Coombs, Program Planner of Holocaust Studies K through 12 here.
I want to say that I think it's important that as a community that you know that your schools are committed to educating our students about the history of the Holocaust, about anti-Semitism. Support your schools, support your teachers, support your principals. Make sure that you know and they know that we're in this together and that we all want to teach kindness, acceptance. We want to teach our students to be upstanders, and we're all in this together, and we're going to make sure that all 200,000 of our students understand that.
Please. Patrick Franklin, President and CEO of the Urban League of Palm Beach County.
Our elected officials make the laws that we have to live by each and every day, at the county level, at the city level, at the state level, federal level. If they don't align with your values and what you want to see and what you are hurting on, then express your absolute right to take them out and put someone else in there that represents you in your best interests.
Rand Hawk, President and founder of the Palm Beach County Human Rights Council. Mr. Hawk.
Once you have the laws and law enforcement comes in and they say, we recommend this should be charged as a hate crime, ultimately it's going to end up in front of a judge. And that's part of the problem. We also elect judges, but judges are also appointed by various governors. They have to make a distinction between protected speech, hate speech, and conduct, because there's a huge difference. But if the judges all say, well, this is protected by the First Amendment, when something is actually being done beyond words, in my opinion, that's a problem. And we've had this issue brought up before the 11th Circuit, the federal circuit that governs us, and they're not on our side. So we really need to make sure that when we're bringing these cases forward, to differentiate between speech and conduct, and hope the judges will finally get the message.
Lawrence Milstein, Regional Director, American Jewish Committee, Palm Beach County.
So first, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank you, Michael, and I want to thank the mayor for convening this forum. I think it's been very helpful, I hope for everybody. As many of us have said, look, it's a community-wide, it's a society-wide approach, and I want to give a piece of good news maybe to end this. One of the results we found from our survey of both the Jewish community and the general population was 9 out of 10 of both communities said that anti-Semitism is not just a problem for the Jewish community, it's a problem for the whole society. And that recognition by society that anti-Semitism is a problem for all of us, because as we said right at the beginning, as we said at the outset, when one community is threatened, all of us are threatened. When one community is threatened, our democratic fabric of society is under attack. It's a good sign that people recognize that. Now we all have to act on that and take the steps. Speak up, speak out, condemn it when you see it. Don't politicize it. If it comes from the left and you're on the left, criticize it. If it comes from the right and you're on the right, criticize it. We all have to do our part in speaking up, condemning it, because anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism, regardless of where it comes from. So thank you all for being here, and continue to do your part, speaking up and speaking out.
And thank you, sir. Alan Poland, Community Security Director, Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County.
Well, I truly believe that anti-Semitism and bigotry of any kind is not within the value that represents this community as a whole. And one of the biggest threats that we can possibly see is our unwillingness to stand up against it. So I'm very happy to see all of you here today and everyone listening. And all I can really say is that if you're seeing any of this hate, stand up, say something, right? Say to whoever you can, as loud as you can, that you don't agree with it, that you feel this is wrong, and that we're not going to accept it as a community.
Thank you, sir. And Lonnie Wilk, Deputy Director, Anti-Defamation League, Florida.
So I'll say a few things. One, I do think it's important to look at the level of hate crimes in our state and in our country. But when we look at 2020 as an example, greater than 65% of the reported hate crimes that were reported to local law enforcement agencies that were then reported up to the FBI in Florida. If we look at Texas and New York as comparable populations, comparable diverse populations, Florida's at about a third of the reported hate crimes that those other states reported. And if we look at the ones that were reported in Florida among the religious category, within the religious category, the Jewish community was targeted in greater than 60% of those incidents. That is a significant a significant issue and a significant flag, I think, for our community leaders, our policymakers, and those are, whenever there's a hate crime, we're always talking about an underlying crime. We're also seeing the rise in anti-Semitic incidents, criminal and non-criminal. And so I'll just end with this, that when we look at an overarching response, we need to look at prevention, we need to look at response and allyship, and then we need to look at healing. And just at the point that we are finished with the healing process, we need to go right and circle right back to prevention. We need to always have this in a mindset: how can we stand up for ourselves? How can we stand up for others in all aspects of society? We need to appeal to everyone's conscience when we can, and when that fails, we can also appeal to the law.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to now turn it over to close with Mayor Weiss. Before I step away, just my personal thanks to each and every one of you for helping to navigate such an important topic and to do it with such eloquence and sense of purpose and passion. So thank you all, and now Mayor Weiss.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Excellent job. Please, a hand for Michael again. So before I close this morning, and first I want to again thank our panelists, thank you again, but this couldn't be done without a lot of other people involved. So there's a number of people I want to thank before we close this morning. I want to acknowledge our County Administrator, Virginia Baker, who is here with us today, and her staff for putting this all together. I'd like to acknowledge from my own staff, Niels Heinrichs is over here, who really, he organized all of this for me. I also want to make you aware, and you've heard a little bit about, there's legislation pending here in Florida in the legislature. It's called HB 269. It's a bill being written by Representative Caruso. It's being co-sponsored by Representative Catherine Waldron is one of our co-sponsors here. But there's petitions in the back of the room that you can sign for your support of this bill. This bill will make it illegal to project anything onto somebody's private property without the owner's permission, whether it's a hate crime or a message or whatever it is. And if it is hateful, if it's hate speech, which is defined in law, it will take it from a misdemeanor to a felony. Also, to let you know, on March 14th, we are bringing forth an ordinance in Palm Beach County. It is modeled after an ordinance that was done in Jacksonville, which will make it locally in Palm Beach County illegal to project onto somebody else's property without their permission. I also, State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg, who couldn't be with us today, he's out of town, and I spoke to him. There were a couple messages he wanted me to share with you from him. Number one, he's 100% with us and behind this, and that he has now, they've announced, they are prosecuting the individual who was caught in this town of Atlantis, dropping that literature, who is going to be prosecuted by the state attorney here. So I want to thank Sheriff Rick Bradshaw, and as you see, all the PBSO deputies that are here for not only keeping us safe here today, but each and every day in Palm Beach County. Thank you very much, Sheriff. And also, I have to say, our fire rescue, the snacks that were out as your way in, you can thank Palm Beach County Fire Rescue for providing that for us this morning. So just to close up, as your mayor, it's my responsibility that all members of our community are treated with dignity and respect and equality. Today, we've had the opportunity to engage in a candid and constructive conversation about how we can work together to combat hate and anti-Semitism in our community. We've heard from experts and advocates who are leading the charge in promoting tolerance and inclusion, and we've listened to their stories and experiences. So I want to thank everyone who has joined us and for their commitment for making our community a better, safer, and more inclusive place. Together, I'm confident we can build a future where hate has no place for anyone, and everyone is welcome here in Palm Beach County. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, and have a great day.